640 feet. That is the elevation at which the largest underground power plant in the United States stops making electricity. Not slows down, stops. Below that line, the water in Lake Oroville sits too low to reach the intakes cut into the hillside above Edward Hyatt Power Plant, and 644 megawatts of generating capacity goes quiet. On August 14th of this year, the California Department of Water Resources measured the lake at 814 feet. 7 days earlier, it had been 826. That is 12 feet in a single week, in a reservoir that anchors the water system, serving 27 million Californians and 750,000 acres of farmland. And here is the detail that almost nobody outside Butte County talks about. The federal license that authorizes this dam to operate expired on January 31st, 2007. 19 years later, the tallest dam in America is still running on a one-year permit that renews itself automatically every single year because the replacement license has never been issued. A temporary arrangement is now old enough to vote. So when people ask whether Oroville is being shut off, the accurate answer is stranger than the question. Parts of it already have been, once before, in living memory, and the decisions that determine whether it happens again are not entirely in California's hands. To understand why 640 feet matters, you have to understand what was built here and how unusual it is. Oroville Dam sits on the Feather River in Butte County, about 70 miles north of Sacramento. It is an earth-filled dam, which means it is not a wall of concrete like Hoover. It is a shaped mountain of compacted rock and clay, 770 feet from base to crest, which makes it the tallest dam in the United States. It was completed in 1968 as the keystone of the State Water Project, California's attempt to solve a geographic problem the state has never escaped. Most of California's water falls in the north. Most of California's people live in the south. The State Water Project exists to move one to the other, and Lake Oroville is where the water waits before it starts moving. At full pool, the reservoir holds about 3.5 million acre-feet. Stand on the Crest Road on a full spring morning, and the water reaches nearly to your feet, a blue arm of it running back into the canyons of the North Fork and the Middle Fork. Stand on the same road in late summer, and you are looking down a long, sloping bathtub of red-brown dirt, boat ramps ending in dust, the old high-water line drawn across the hillsides like a chalk mark. This year, the Enterprise boat ramp has already been closed by California State Parks because the water pulled away from the bottom of it. Buried inside that hillside is the piece of the project most people never see. Edward Hyatt Power Plant is not a building beside the dam. It is a chamber blasted out of the rock underneath it, and according to the Civil Engineering Database, it is the largest underground pumping generating installation in the country. 3 conventional turbines and 3 pump turbines, 644 megawatts of installed capacity. Across the wider Oroville complex, including the thermolito facilities downstream, the license capacity is roughly 762 megawatts, producing an average of 2.2 billion kilowatt-hours a year. When the lake is high, that power is cheap, fast, and useful because a hydro plant can come up to full output in minutes while a gas plant takes hours. When the lake is low, none of that is available. Now the numbers from this year in order because the order is the story. Last winter did not start badly. On January 5th, DWR opened the main spillway and began required flood control releases, pushing 15,000 cubic feet per second down the Feather River. Between December 20th and January 29th, Lake Oroville rose 91 feet and gained roughly 1.06 million acre-feet of water. That is an enormous gain in 6 weeks, the kind of number that produces headlines about California's water problems being over. But read the operational notice DWR sent to State Water Project contractors on January 29th, and a different sentence appears. The storms had been warm. Snowpack accumulation was below average. Warm, dry weather through January had already begun stripping away what little had fallen. The rain arrived, the snow did not. That distinction is the entire year. By March, the reservoir was at 871 feet and 87% of capacity, and the state was recording extraordinary heat. By April 17th, the lake had climbed to 889 feet, 95% full, 124% of its historical average for the date. On May 15th, it reached 897 feet, 3.38 million acre-feet, which is 99% of total capacity. DWR was reporting that on windy days, water was splashing over the crest of the emergency spillway and noting that this was normal and expected in the structure's design. On that same day, the Department of Water Resources announced that California's statewide snowpack stood at 12% of average. It had peaked in mid-February, roughly 6 weeks early, and then melted off. Director Carla Nemeth's assessment was blunt in the way that only water managers are blunt. The reservoirs were full, but the frozen reservoir in the mountains was gone, and there would be no refill until the next winter. That is the shape of the problem. A full lake in May is not a surplus. It is a fixed budget with no deposits scheduled for 6 months. Watch what happens next. May 15th, 897 feet. August 7th, 826 feet and 70% of capacity. August 14th, 814 feet and 2.27 million acre-feet, or 66%. That is 83 feet of elevation gone in 91 days, and the rate has been accelerating through the hottest part of the summer. In the second week of August alone, the lake gave up 12 feet and roughly 200,000 acre-feet. Feather River releases were running 8,000 cubic feet per second, with 850 of that flowing through the city of Oroville itself, and the rest coming out of the Thermalito Afterbay River outlet. None of that is a malfunction. That is the system working as designed. Summer is when the State Water Project spends. The water leaving Oroville right now is running south to keep the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta from turning salty, to hold Feather River temperatures cold enough for spring run and fall run Chinook, and to fill contracts for 29 public water agencies. The State Water Project allocation for 2026 opened at 10% on December 1st, rose to 30% on January 29th, and reached 45% on May 15th. Every percentage point of that increase is water that has to physically leave this reservoir. It is worth being concrete about where that water goes, because 27 million Californians is an abstraction until you trace the route. Water released from Oroville runs down the Feather River to the Sacramento River, and from the Sacramento into the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, where State Water Project pumps lift it into the California Aqueduct. From there, it travels south through the San Joaquin Valley, over the Tehachapi Mountains, through a pumping plant that raises it nearly 2,000 vertical feet in a single lift, and down into Southern California. Some of it is stored midway at San Luis Reservoir in Merced County, which holds supply for both the State Water Project and the federal Central Valley Project. Some of it irrigates part of the 750,000 acres of farmland the project serves. Some of it ends up in the distribution system of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which serves Los Angeles. A foot of elevation lost at Oroville in August is not a local statistic. It is a subtraction from a delivery chain roughly 700 miles long. There is also a layer of this that has nothing to do with drinking water at all. California's electricity grid, run by the California Independent System Operator, has a specific vulnerability in the late afternoon and early evening, when solar output falls away while demand is still climbing. Hydropower is one of the few resources that can ramp into that window quickly, and the Oroville complex is licensed for roughly 762 megawatts of it. That is why DWR's 2021 statement stressed that it had been in continuous communication with CAISO and the California Energy Commission before taking Hyatt offline. The plant was not simply a revenue source. It was a scheduled block of flexible capacity on a grid that has to be balanced second by second, and its loss had to be planned for months in advance rather than absorbed on the day, which is why the number 814 is less important than the direction, and the direction is less important than what sits at the bottom of the drawdown. If you find this useful, subscribe. I'm Simon, and we cover water systems, dams, and slow-moving infrastructure stories like this one as they actually develop, with the full picture you need to follow what is happening. Here is what sits at the bottom. As Lake Oroville falls, the dam loses its tools one at a time, in a specific sequence. High in the reservoir, everything works. The main spillway, rebuilt after 2017, can pass 270,000 cubic feet per second. Hyatt Power Plant generates. The Thermalito complex downstream generates again on the same water, but as the surface drops toward the low 600s, the intakes feeding Hyatt run out of water above them, and generation has to stop to protect the machinery. This is not a hypothetical. It has already happened. On August 5, 2021, State Water Project operations managers took Hyatt Power Plant offline because of falling lake levels. It was the first time in the plant's history that low water had shut it down. Director Carla Nemet's statement at the time was careful and worth understanding precisely. The state had anticipated the moment and had planned for the loss in both water and grid management, having been in continuous contact with the California Independent System Operator and the California Energy Commission. The plant did not fail. It was switched off deliberately, on schedule, because the alternative was running turbines without enough water column above them. That summer, Lake Oroville fell below 645 feet, breaking a record low that had stood since September 1977. DWR forecasts at the time projected elevations as low as 620 feet by late October. State parks closed the lake's seaplane airport. Hyatt stayed dark until winter, coming back online in early January 2022, with a single generating unit producing roughly 30 megawatts on about 900 cubic feet per second of outflow. A 644 megawatt plant restarted at less than 5% of its capacity. So the shutdown in the title is not a prediction. It is a documented event with a date attached, and the elevation that triggered it is a known number. But there is a second, quieter piece of equipment that matters more, and it is the one engineers argue about. At the base of the dam sit two 6-foot conduits running through the embankment, each fitted with a 72-inch spherical valve and a 54-inch fixed cone valve. That is the River Valve Outlet System, or RVOS. It is the fourth way to move water out of Lake Oroville, alongside the main spillway, the emergency spillway, and the power plant. And according to DWR's own presentation on drought operations, if the lake falls below elevation 640 feet, the RVOS is the only means available to release the remaining 850,000 acre-feet of water in the reservoir. Read that again, because it is the hinge of the entire story. Below 640 feet, the tallest dam in the United States has exactly one working outlet, and it is 2 pipes with valves on the end. In February 2017, when the state needed every option it had, those 2 pipes were not available. Reporting at the time established that the river outlet valves were out of commission during the crisis, despite years of repair work, eliminating one of the 4 ways to lower the reservoir at the precise moment lowering the reservoir was the only thing that mattered. Ronald Stork, a senior policy advocate with Friends of the River in Sacramento and a longtime analyst of flood control operations at major dams, made the point plainly afterward. The dam needs river outlets that work because the situation could recur. What happened during those days is now one of the most studied dam safety incidents in American history. Heavy runoff from a sequence of atmospheric river storms forced large releases down the main spillway. The concrete chute failed, opening a hole roughly 30 feet deep and 200 feet wide. With the main spillway compromised, the reservoir rose until, on February 11th, water flowed over the emergency spillway for the first time since the dam was completed. The emergency spillway was not a structure. It was a concrete weir with a bare hillside below it, and that hillside began eroding backward toward the weir far faster than anyone expected. On February 12th, law enforcement ordered the evacuation of about 188,000 people living downstream along the Feather River. Operators reopened the damaged main spillway gates and pushed roughly 100,000 cubic feet per second through the broken chute, accepting the destruction of the spillway in order to pull the lake down and take pressure off the emergency weir. The independent forensic team report that followed did not describe a freak storm. It described a long-term systemic failure across the design of the project, the regulatory framework, and general industry practice, one that had not recognized or addressed the spillway's inherent design and construction weaknesses, the poor quality of the bedrock underneath it, and the deteriorated condition of the chute. There is a further finding that deserves attention. Researchers at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Colorado later analyzed the February 2017 storm sequence and concluded that, while intense, it was not extraordinary in the amount of rain and snow it delivered. The event that nearly emptied Northern California's largest reservoir onto its neighbors was not an unprecedented storm. It was an ordinary heavy storm meeting infrastructure that could not handle it. Study co-author Keith Musselman framed the forward-looking concern in terms of warming intensifying Sierra Nevada storms and driving extreme melt of deep mountain snowpack, which is precisely the pattern California recorded this year. Warm storms, rain instead of snow, a snowpack that peaked 6 weeks early and vanished. The repair was extraordinary. More than 700 construction workers rebuilt the main spillway in erosion-resistant concrete with new walls, more than doubling the slab thickness and heavily increasing replacing the reinforcement. The emergency spillway received a splash pad and buttress built from roughly 700,000 cubic yards of roller-compacted concrete, anchored down to competent rock, which is where much of the cost overrun came from. The original estimate for the incident was between $100 and $200 million. By January 2018, it was $870 million. By September 2018, it was $1.1 billion, with the Federal Emergency Management Agency expected to reimburse up to 75% and state water project agencies covering the rest, meaning ratepayers as far away as Los Angeles. DWR also launched the Oroville Dam Safety Comprehensive Needs Assessment in January 2018, publishing it in November 2020. It is the most comprehensive risk analysis the department has ever performed on any facility. Its conclusion was that the Oroville Dam complex is safe to operate and that no urgent repairs are needed. It also recommended a set of risk reduction projects, new instruments to measure water pressure inside the embankment and improve seepage monitoring, a modern seismic stability analysis, and raising Parish Camp Saddle Dam. And in March 2022, DWR filed to rehabilitate the river valve outlet system itself, installing 2 new spherical valves with new mechanical and electrical controls immediately downstream of the existing valves, specifically to protect against an uncontrolled release of water. There is one more consequence of a falling reservoir that rarely appears in coverage, and it is biological rather than mechanical. A deep reservoir stratifies in summer. Warm water sits on top. Cold water settles at depth, and that cold layer, the cold water pool, is what allows DWR to release water into the Feather River at temperatures salmon can survive. As the lake drops, the cold water pool does not just shrink in proportion. It shrinks faster because the warm surface layer keeps absorbing heat while the cold volume beneath it is drawn down and released. That is a large part of why the department's weekly updates track fish counts alongside elevations. Between March 4th and August 8th of this year, the Feather River Monitoring Station recorded 8,512 upstream migrating spring run Chinook and, from July 1st onward, 2,224 fall run Chinook. Those fish are a condition of the dam's operating requirements, not a footnote to them. In 2021, when Hyatt was offline, DWR used the river valve outlet system specifically to keep releasing water from the base of the dam to maintain river temperature and outflow. The 2 pipes at the bottom of the embankment are not only the last resort for water supply. They are also, at low lake levels, the last resort for keeping the Feather River cold. And the communities that sit below all of this have their own relationship with the word evacuation. The 1880,000 people ordered out on February 12, 2017 included nearly 19,000 from the city of Oroville itself, told to leave within the first hour, most of them moving north toward Chico. 21 months later, in November 2018, the same county experienced the Camp Fire, which destroyed the town of Paradise about 20 miles away. Butte County has been through 2 mass evacuations inside 2 years, one of them triggered by the infrastructure that supplies water to a third of the state's population. That history is the reason the county's arguments about unfulfilled commitments carry the tone they do, and it is context that any account of the Relly-Nensing dispute needs in order to make sense. Which brings the story to the part that has nothing to do with concrete. On February 11, 1957, DWR was issued a 50-year federal license to build and operate the Oroville facilities, designated FERC Project Number 2100. That license expired on January 31, 2007. It has never been replaced. For 19 years, Oroville has operated under an annual license that automatically renews each year until the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issues a new one. The relensing effort was not neglected. DWR and a coalition of agencies and stakeholders designed and completed a $27 million suite of environmental studies. DWR filed its application for a new license on January 26, 2005. On March 26, 2006, DWR and a large majority of stakeholders concluded a settlement agreement, a package estimated to deliver more than $1 billion of investment in the Oroville area across environmental, recreational, cultural, and operational commitments, including what DWR describes as the largest habitat improvement program in the history of the Feather River. The State Water Resources Control Board issued water quality certification for the project on December 15, 2010. Everything was filed, nothing was issued. This year, Butte County went public with the consequences, publishing decades of historical records and planning documents and pressing the argument that the community around the dam has been waiting 2 decades for benefits that were negotiated but never delivered, while continuing to live directly downstream of the structure that produces them. DWR's response was that it has met every FERC process deadline, filed every document required, repeatedly asked the Commission to issue the license, and is required in the meantime to keep operating under the original license and a recreation plan written in 1994. The department has said it is optimistic the new license will be issued in 2026. Both sides of that argument have real weight, and the data settles it in an uncomfortable direction. DWR is not wrong that it filed. Butte County is not wrong that the county has been governed by a 1994 recreation plan and a 1957 license through a spillway failure, a mass evacuation, a record drought, a record low lake, and a billion-dollar reconstruction. The relancing was designed to reassess how this dam should be run in light of modern conditions. Those conditions have changed twice over while the file has sat. And this is the pattern that runs underneath every part of the Oroville story. The engineering questions were identified early and answered slowly. The river outlets had a long history of problems before they were unavailable in 2017. The spillway's weaknesses were documented in the record before the chute opened up. The relancing was completed by the applicant in 2005 and remains unissued in 2026. The failures at Oroville have consistently been failures of timing rather than failures of knowledge. So what happens next? Through the fall, Lake Oroville will keep dropping. That is normal and expected. The drawdown continues until autumn demand falls off and the first storms arrive. Between mid-September and June, DWR is required under water control manual guidelines set by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to hold empty space in the reservoir for flood control, which means that even as the lake falls, the department is legally obligated to reserve room for storms that may or may not come. The reservoir cannot simply be filled to the top and held there. The threshold to watch is not 640 feet this year. At 814 feet in mid-August, with 102% of the historical average for the date still in storage, Oroville is not close to a Hyatt shutdown in 2026. The threshold to watch is what the lake carries into next spring, because that is the number that decides whether 2027 has a floor under it. Carryover storage is the entire margin. It is the reason DWR spent this year repeating in nearly every weekly update that it was conserving as much water as possible while meeting flood control and environmental requirements. And the input that decides carryover is the one California could not produce this year. Not rainfall, snowpack. A wet, warm winter fills the reservoir in January and leaves nothing in the mountains for July. That is what happened in 2026, 91 feet of gain in 6 weeks, then a snowpack peaking in mid-February and gone by May, then an 83-foot drawdown in 3 months. 2 dry winters in a row after a season like this is the sequence that produced 2021, and 2021 is the year Hyatt went dark for the first time. It is also worth saying clearly what this story is not. Oroville Dam is not in danger of collapse. The Comprehensive Needs Assessment examined that question with more rigor than has ever been applied to a DWR facility and concluded the complex is safe to operate with no urgent repairs required. The spillway that failed has been rebuilt to a far higher standard than the one that broke. The risk at Oroville is not a sudden structural failure. It is the slower, less dramatic problem of a reservoir asked to do more things than a shrinking snowpack can supply, operating under a license written for a California that no longer exists. There are dates on the calendar. DWR will announce an initial state water project allocation for 2027 by December 1st, as it is contractually required to do every year. FERC may or may not issue the new license for project number 2100 this year, ending a wait that began when the previous license expired in 2007. The rehabilitated river valves, the seepage instruments, the seismic analysis, and the parish camp saddle dam work continue on their own schedules. And the reservoir keeps doing the only thing it knows how to do, which is to reflect whatever the Sierra Nevada gave it 4 months earlier. Stand on the crest road at Oroville today, and none of this is visible. The dam is enormous and motionless. The rebuilt spillway is a clean gray ribbon down the hillside, the widest and strongest it has ever been. The emergency spillway sits above its new concrete apron, used exactly once in 58 years. Somewhere under your feet, in a cavern in the bedrock, 3 turbines and 3 pump turbines are